Charles.
Hi.
Good to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yes. As is quite typical of us at the Tech Sales Nexus, we make sure that we are consistently meeting up like this monthly to share value, to, get thought leaders in our space to be able to share their wealth of knowledge on specific topics that are very particular to our roles to enable us and equip us to be better salespeople. Today, we're talking about identifying your ideal customer profile. This is very pivotal to everything that we do as salespeople. If you do not know who your ICPs are, are you going to even sell anything in the first place? So that is what Charles is here to talk about. And that is what I am here to suck in all the knowledge that he'll be sharing today. And I really hope that you are too. So I'm going to let Charles introduce himself. No other person will do a better job doing that than him. So over to you, Charles. Let's meet you.
Thank you, Gertrude. Pleasure to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. It's a Saturday evening. I know, given that it's the festive season, folks probably have better and more interesting things to do on a Saturday evening in December. But you guys are here to learn, and like you said earlier, Gertrude, to try to get a head start into 2025. So yeah, it's great to see folks here. Okay, so in terms of intros, my name is Charles Idem, sales professional, been in the industry, or been in sales, I should say. Actually, been in sales since the beginning of my career. So I had a somewhat unconventional career path. I started out in consulting, in management consulting for a startup, believe it or not. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the regular consulting firms, the names that you all hear, the KPMGs, the Deloittes, and PwCs. When I got out of university, I joined a friend who started a consulting firm to compete with those names that you know in Nigeria. And I was the first hire actually in the company. And from the early days, because of the size of the company, I had to sell, just like the founder of the company, who was the founding partner of the firm. And so very early on, I was exposed to selling and trying to generate business. And I think that was actually very pivotal for me in terms of setting me on the path to my career today. But then fast forward from there, I was in that industry for about 4 or 5 years, and then I made a transition into software about a decade ago, and I got hired to do enterprise sales at legacy. I call it legacy now, but they won't like me saying that it's a legacy company, but it is one of the legacy IT operations firms, BMC Software, headquartered in Houston, Texas. Used to be listed on the stock exchange, but got acquired by private equity, a consortium of private equity firms, I think in 2014. It has been private ever since. So I started out selling IT service management and IT operations software for BMC in a territory manager role, and then transitioned or left that firm, went to another N280, which is a network management software vendor. So I did that for another couple of years. Then I sort of switched direction after working at the more sort of traditional IT firms, and moved into the startup space. Tried my hands on a startup with a few friends. That didn't go well, so I learned what not to do. And that's one of the failure teaches you lessons that you can never learn when you win. So that was a good experience for me as well. And then I moved, I joined Paystack. I was lucky to join Paystack, which is a payments company, which sort of pioneered the modern era of payments in Africa. So I joined Paystack in 2018 as the head of sales, and I built out the sales team and the sales organization for over 5 years. I did that until early this year, when I left to do something different. And so now I'm a co-founder of a firm that operates in a similar space in payments. It's called Start Button, which is a merchant of record service, which essentially is a payments company that helps businesses that are not local to certain markets to expand into those markets and collect payments in local currency. So that's my career path. Yeah, over the years, been privileged to sell different, just sell to different industries, sell a range of products across verticals, from old, like I said, legacy software, where we were selling on-premise software before SaaS and cloud software became a thing, and then obviously sold that as well in payments, and continuing to do that today. So that's a bit about my background, and
Interesting.
yeah, today,
it's interesting and it's daunting.
Well, I mean, it's trust me, there's a lot. There are many lessons I've learned along the way, and I think anyone who's committed, who has the, because at the start you never know where you're going, but like as long as you're committed to a path, you can always do that, whatever you set your mind to, and learn and achieve success in it. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Interesting. I'm glad you said that. I needed to hear that. I'm at a phase at the moment. Akachi knows what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
that actually, helps me. So
Absolutely.
yeah, let's get to it. So
Awesome.
AK has a question. Okay,
So please go ahead.
Oh no, I don't have a question.
Okay.
I was trying to get a reaction out of that. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh.
All right.
Okay. All right then. So are we gonna be using like a deck or something, or how do you want to?
So I have sort of a spreadsheet that I'll share, which will be the core of the lesson. But yeah, I'll share my screen to just run you guys through different things.
Wow, this is different.
Yeah, sure.
This is different. Yeah.
Okay. So if we're good to go, I can start, and
yeah, sure.
Okay. Right. So the topic, if I remember correctly, is know your ICP, right? Close more
deals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're pretty much all familiar with what an ICP is, right? It's an acronym for Ideal Customer Profile, which essentially means every business needs to know the characteristics or attributes of the ideal customer, right? So that you can identify them. It's like, I guess what's the best analogy I can give? It's like, I have an analogy in mind, and it's a funny one. You know how they say know your love language, right? People know what their love languages are, right? And so when they meet people who exhibit those characteristics, they can say, oh, okay, this person looks like an ideal partner for me, right? So it's the same thing in business, where in terms of trying to identify or understand what an ideal customer profile is, it's essentially a business just looking out at the universe of customers there and identifying the qualities or attributes in certain customers that make them a good fit for your own product or service, right? So that's what the ideal customer profile is. So I will take you through essentially how to identify or even create that ideal customer profile as a startup, to how to know your ideal customer as an operating or already operating entity or operating business, so a mature business or a growing business. So either seed stage business or scale up, as it were, right? So let me start by sharing a tweet that I saw a few months ago. Incidentally, I was working on the ICP for my company at the moment, and somehow these things happen sometimes when you're working on something, you see something else that just aligns with that or actually speaks to that directly, and it resonates with what you're doing, and then it just sort of fuels the work that you're doing. So I'll share a tweet that I came across and just talk through it, and we can then go to sort of the template that I want to share, which will form the core of this session. Right? Can you guys see my screen?
I can now. I can see it.
Awesome. Right. So I follow this handle, a tech sales guy, right? Which you can see. You can see the handle on the screen. And a few months ago, I think this was in July exactly. So he posted this tweet. He said, well, I don't know if they call it X these days, right? But it's tricky to say X. It's tweet to everyone. He said, I spent 5 years building onboarding plans for B2B sales. This is the first activity every outbound rep does. Ideal customer profile. Insert ICP attributes in the top row, add 25 companies to the columns, mixing customers, prospects, and DQs. So I believe this qualifies. And then reps can't do any other activities until they get approximately or greater than 90%. It doesn't matter how beautiful your pitch is if you're knocking on the wrong doors. And the tweet, so he shared, or attached this screenshot to the tweet, which had a spreadsheet with a few columns, and at the end, the last column, which is sort of a deduction of all the others, concluding as to whether the companies listed are good fit or not, right? So that was the tweet. I think there was a thread, so if you guys can definitely go, it was a short thread, so you can go and look at the handle and see what the thread said. But essentially, he just hit the nail on the head and said, by saying that it doesn't matter how beautiful your pitch is if you're knocking on the wrong doors. And that's really what the whole concept of having an ideal customer profile helps you do. It's to know who needs your service or product and who is best for you to sell to, right? So before now, I think this wasn't something that was mainstream, but as we've sort of advanced or progressed further into this digital and sort of knowledge era, you know, as businesses have reflected and business leaders have started, you know, thought more deeply about how to, especially, you know, in the context of this expansion of technology-driven businesses, like business leaders have thought about how do we've built something great. We had a hypothesis, we had a hunch that there was a certain problem that we felt we cared enough about and felt we could build a product to solve, right? So, but then, you know, this hunch that we have, how do we validate it, right? Who do we sell this product to, right? How do we identify all the people that we believe are grappling with this problem and approach them to present what we have to them as a solution, right? So that's the whole concept of the ICP, is to just sort of think deeply about the hunch I have as a business or a startup, right? Or the product that I've built to solve a certain problem. Who is the best person, or who does this solve the problem best for, right? And how do I find as many of these people as possible out there in the wild? So that is the whole exercise, and it's a very essential exercise because, as the guy said in the tweet, if you're knocking down, it doesn't matter how beautiful your pitch is if you're knocking on the wrong doors, right? Again, going back to the old days, I'm sure you guys are all familiar. You've heard of the old sort of itinerant salespeople. Back in the day, people used to walk door to door, knock on doors to sell everything from knives,
Exactly.
like, you know, washing machines, like whatever. They would just, you know, pick a neighborhood and just go door to door knocking. And it was hit or miss, right? You knock on 100 doors in a day, you might sell to 20, but then you spend time going to the other 80 and you couldn't sell to them, right? Somewhere in that whole process, that effort could have been optimized, but we didn't have enough information at that time to sort of know how to optimize the process, right? As though the folks at the time didn't have enough information to optimize it. But today, there's so much information and data out there that we can literally sit down on our desktops and figure out or analyze based on data that we can find online who the ideal customer is for our product or service. And so we're going to get into that a little bit now. So let me start by, so I'm going to stop sharing this and move on to the template that I've prepared. But I'll start by saying the concept of the ICP starts with something called a beachhead segment, right? So if you think of a startup, right? Any startup, you guys can see my screen, right? You can see the template I'm sharing.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So any startup, fantastic. So okay, let's take a step back to how companies get started or how startups emerge and sort of grow from literally an idea to becoming a big business, right? So when a founder or an entrepreneur identifies a problem, that problem typically emerges from their own experience with something, right? So I remember the story of Uber. I think Travis, if I remember the story correctly, and I read about this a very long time ago, but Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber, was in Paris, if I'm not wrong, and had gone out with friends or either to a dinner or a business meeting or something of the sort. And then after the dinner, because he was obviously visiting Paris, he didn't live there, he and his friends stepped out and wanted to make their way home. But they couldn't find a cab. And they sort of, I think if I remember the story, and forgive me if I'm trying to sort of draw from memory here, and it was a long time ago I read this or talked about it, but essentially they tried to find a cab. They were either at a hotel or someplace. They tried to get the concierge to get them a cab, but they couldn't get it. And then they decided to walk and then see if they could find a cab. And so they ended up walking a little distance and talking among themselves. And at some point, then they stopped and then realized they've been walking for a while and they still haven't found a cab or something of that sort. And then that was when the thought sparked in his mind that this shouldn't be as difficult. Like, it shouldn't be this difficult to find a taxi in any city, anywhere where anyone is, right? We were, at the time, this must have been 2009, 10, if I'm not wrong. He thought to himself, like, technology had advanced to the point where the same way I can, I don't know, book flights online or, do other things, book a hotel, I should be able to push a button and a taxi should be available to me, right? Based on the fact that there are people there's a ton of cars in the world, there are a ton of private cab drivers who are probably sitting somewhere and not occupied. And so if people have cars and there's demand, I should be able to push a button to find a taxi. And that was the light bulb moment for him. And then he went back and sort of played around with the idea and then eventually built the first version of the Uber app and trialed it, I think, in LA or in Silicon Valley somewhere. And that was how Uber was born, right? So, but in going from that idea to finding customers, and obviously Uber is now it's probably B2B and B2C, but at the time, the initial iteration was for it to be a B2C business, like, consumer business. So with building the version 1 and launching the product, he had to find customers who he could test with, and he could validate his assumption that people would use a digital service to request taxis. And so he, obviously, as someone in Silicon Valley, where there's a ton of people who are willing to test tech products, he was able to find a community of people to test with, and he built, and he was able to test and then obviously scale Uber from there. But that first step of testing, right, is where the concept of a beachhead customer or customer segment comes into play. So the beachhead segment, right, for a startup, right? And when I say startup, I mean founding stage startup, not a startup that already has customers, but a startup that's actually trying to find its first customer, right? The beachhead segment or beachhead customer is the first person or first organization that a startup is able to put a product in front of and validate that this product solves a problem for. And so how does a startup go about that process? It typically starts with the founder who is in a certain industry or even who has created a product or service for that industry, an industry that they're not part of, and then reaches out to their network within that industry to try to get someone who he or she believes is struggling with the problem that they've built a product to solve, and get them to test that product, right? So that's the beachhead customer or the beachhead segment, right? The segment would obviously be different players or different organizations within that industry. So at that very early stage, being able to find that beachhead customer involves the process of sort of documenting what the product or service does, the problem that it solves very clearly, and who it solves that problem for. So when the founder is able to do that and then get a customer, an individual or an organization to be able to test their hypothesis with, they can then sort of generate results or take that feedback and determine whether their hypothesis was actually valid or not, like invalid. And then from there, they go through the process of customer development. And I'm sure you guys have heard of the concept of customer development, which is essentially early stage startups trying to expand from one customer to multiple customers, right? To validate that the product they've created solves a problem not just for one person, but solves a problem for multiple people. So they go through that whole customer development process where they reach out to multiple people and ask questions, put the product in front of them, and take feedback as to whether it solves the problem, whether there's a real utility or whether there's not any value there. And at the point where they are able to validate that they're solving a problem that someone is willing to pay for, they start to lay the foundation for building a scalable or a viable business, based on identifying that beachhead segment and sort of expanding that beachhead segment further through customer development. So that's the first step from the standpoint of an early stage startup, right? So before I go further, let me just pause. Is there any questions? Is there anything I've said that is not clear?
I was going to ask a question about the beachhead, how it's spelled, but I quickly, did that and I got the spelling.
Fantastic.
So you mentioned beachhead. You also mentioned customer development, right?
Correct. Yes.
Can you shed more light on customer development, please?
Okay, sure. So customer development is a process that early stage startups go through to profile their customers or potential or prospective customers properly and validate that they actually solve a problem. Like, these are people who have the pain that they've built a product or a solution for, essentially.
Okay. Is that similar to buyer persona?
Yes. So the personas are the people, the actual people within the organization who own the pain. But then if you think of the organization, as long as there's the product or solution or service solves a problem for a business, right? That business is a customer, right? But then there's one person within the organization or multiple people within the organization that feel that pain based on the job they do within the organization. So they're definitely linked, right? The buyer personas. So if you think of, accounting software, so Sage or whatever other accounting software exists. There's all the invoicing. I'm trying to remember the names of a few, but Sage is one of them anyway. The accounting software will be used within the finance department, right? The CFO, the head of finance, head of financial planning and accounts, head of account. Those are the personas who, if you were selling accounting software, you would approach those people, right? There's no use going to the head of HR to sell accounting software. What you want to sell to the head of HR is HR information management system or HR, system, right? So the personas are the people who grapple with that pain based on the functions that they perform within the organization. But then customer development is the process of identifying and validating a customer, that a certain organization who is a customer for your product or service because they have a pain and because your product solves that problem, addresses that pain, eases that pain, and that pain is acute to the point where they will be willing to pay to get it, to take that pain away, right? To use your product to address whatever inefficiency or whatever gap they have within their organization. So that's essentially what customer development is, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, right. So that is the first step, right? So if any of you is ever in a startup, and I say when I say start early stage startup, right? That is the process you typically go through as a founder or as a part of a founding team in building and launching a new product. You want to identify your beachhead customer or beachhead customer segment, and you want to carry out customer development to validate that these are ideal customers who have a pain and who feel that pain enough to the point where they'll be willing to pay for the product or the service you've built. Now, moving away from early stage startups to already existing companies or companies that are operating, which is probably the context where most of us find ourselves, right? Today, like as a sales professional, sales rep, SDR, BDR, whatever sort of sales role one finds themselves in, if you're parachuted into an organization today, and as is typically the case, right? Once you take a sales job in, your bosses or your managers just expect you to deliver, right? Bring in sales, bring in revenue, and make your targets, smash your targets, and make all of us happy, right? So at that point where we're parachuted into an organization and we're told to figure things out and just deliver on whatever the objectives are, we need to do the whole process of territory development, which is similar to customer development, right? So you're given a territory and you're essentially told to go and, bring generate business, right, within that territory. And so you have to now go through the process of saying, okay, building pipeline. Who are the prospective customers in this territory that I'm covering that we can sell to? And where are these customers? And then who are the personas within those organizations that I can start to reach out to directly to have conversations with, right? So that is the process that a salesperson will typically follow. Even if it's a BDR or someone who's just doing lead generation, it's a similar process in the sense that you're given a territory. The first step is to sort of start to make sense of that territory. So who are the organizations within this territory that I can reach out to generate leads? And who are the people, who are the actual leads that I can reach out to have conversations with to validate whether they have a problem that the product that I have can solve, right? So that first step in the process of profiling customers and making sense of the territory is the actual task of sort of building out the ideal customer profile, right? So let's use the template to sort of make more sense, right? So if we have a territory today, and is there anyone here who, like, any random person can just tell me, like, what is your role? I imagine we're all salespeople here, right? So Akachi or Fadike or Bianca or Oluwashi, what organizations do you work for? What do you sell essentially? What product or service? Shay, go ahead, please.
Good evening, Charles.
Yeah.
So first off, I would like to say I feel like this session was meant for me because
For you, we all feel the same.
yeah, because really, so I'm sort of like working with a founding startup at the moment that is trying to handle payroll, and like for the past few months we've been in our like testing stage. So we are about to roll out fully in the coming year 2025. And you speaking about looking for the beachhead customer hasn't been something I've been thinking about until this moment. So here's why I said I feel like your session was actually meant for me.
Amazing.
Yeah. Anyway,
so you said it's a HR?
No, we are handling just payroll, taxes, pensions. Yes.
Okay. Payroll, taxes, and what?
Pensions.
Pensions. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a digital product, right? It's software.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, fantastic. So, and you're going to be selling to essentially any customer, any organization rather that has obviously multiple staff and has to pay the staff, deduct taxes, remit taxes to the government, and also deduct pensions. And
exactly.
Okay, so it's a broad spectrum of potential customers, right? So now that very good point. So we can use this as an example to sort of figure out what the ideal customer profile is, right? So given what Oluwaseyi's business does, to start to narrow down to the ideal customer profile for that business, we would want to essentially build the parameters of how we're going to assess the ideal customer profile, right, or the ideal customer. And so what we will do is we'll say, okay, there are different categories of businesses, right? There are micro enterprises, there are small businesses, there are SMEs or medium enterprises, there are large businesses and large corporates, and then there are multinationals. So the customers can be drawn from any of those categories of business. So that's the first parameter that we want to take into account. Is like, okay, who in thinking of our ideal customer, where do we think they will fit, or what broad segment will they fall under, right? And how do we segment businesses to be able to say that our ideal customer falls within a certain segment, right? So we have to start thinking from the bottom up. And that's why the first step would be typically, because you remember we said they could be drawn from any, it's a broad spectrum of customers that you could potentially sell to. But to narrow down on the ideal customer, we need to build a framework that helps us group customers into different segments. And so when you think about businesses, you think about it from the standpoint of micro, small and medium, or medium, large, corporate, and multinational. So in building out the templates to analyze your ideal customer, I think the first thing that you actually want to do is to actually have a sort of segments, right? Business segmentation or something. Let's just put it as business segmentation for lack of a better. We can always refine this, right? But it's the most important thing is to just put the idea on paper first. So in terms of the segmentation, we can actually come here and just create a drop down that allows us to what we call it. Let me just see if I can copy this and just paste it in here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes,
I can hear you.
yes, I can.
Fantastic. So let's say, yeah. So if we put this in here, we can actually just edit out the. And there were numbers I used here, but we can basically just replace this and say small. Let's say micro enterprise. Small business. Say SME. Large business. Say corporate, and then multinational. Multinational, right? So that's the first parameter that, okay, sorry, that didn't, okay, I would have to edit the values in here to change, did it change it for, yeah, okay, so fantastic. So it's actually applied, but I didn't edit all the values. There's some other values, I'll probably have to take them out. Let me see. Okay, I can delete that, and yeah, we're good. Right, so for this first sort of parameter, we now have all the possible entries. So small business, micro, large, corporate, multinational. So now we've established the base parameter that we can say, you know, all our businesses will fall into one of these categories, right? Or all our prospective customers will fall into one of these categories. So we can then go downstream from here and now say, okay, what other elements or what other attributes are relevant that we think we should identify and profile to help us narrow down on what our ideal or who our ideal customer is. So we've defined business segmentation as the first level. What do we think could be an ideal parameter as well? And you can already see like some of the stuff is already listed there, right? Industry, country, region, and company size, revenue, etc. All those things are attributes that are relevant in trying to profile an ideal customer. So the goal is really to just think through what parameters do I think will be helpful in informing me about whether a customer would be ideal for the product or service that I have, or that I'm selling, or that I'm building, right? And so having started with business segments, which is the foundational layer, you now want to just build on top of that layer with each successive parameter, right? And so we can say we can go from business segment to company type, right? We can even say, okay, should the next parameter be company type? Should it be and when we say company type, again, it will be limited liability company, or for what you call it, non-profit or for-profit, or I mean, within even like the for-profit company, there are different categorizations, right? There's a limited liability company, there's company that's limited by trustees, and all that type of stuff. So depending on how granular you want to go, you can include all those attributes there, and determine whether it's relevant to have those attributes at that granular level, or do you want to keep it high level and just say company type, for-profit or non-profit, right? And you can just leave it as those two. And then the next thing is industry, right? So from company type to industry, you can now start to think of industries like broadly, what industries typically are sort of recognized So if you think of globally, like based on global definitions of global studies or research, you have financial services, you have professional services, you have real estate and construction, you have hospitality. So if you think of the broad industry categorization, you can then build out that industry parameter and start to profile companies within each industry. And then you can think of something like even how long the companies have been around, right? Is it would the ideal customers be would the ideal customers be companies that are still relatively young or have only existed for a few years? Would they be, within 1 to 5 years old, or would they be 5 to 10 or 10 above 10 years? That could be another attribute. And then, in terms of like their funding, the level of maturity, essentially. So it doesn't even have to be funding raised. Like you can define maturity by whether they are still externally funded or whether they are self-funded. So if a company is externally funded, like your typical startups that raise VC funding, right, then you know that they are still not as mature as a self-funded company, which could be either a sustainable business, limited liability company that didn't raise external funding, but that was profitable from day one and has been self-funded from day one, or a company that is already a public company that is listed on the stock exchange, right? A company that's listed on the stock exchange, you could call them self-funded, but they're not exactly self-funded because they are publicly listed, which means people can trade their shares, right? So they have a mix of being self-sustained and being externally funded. So those are parameters that you can define. And then other things like employee count, right? You can look at, and in fact, employee count is probably one of the most fundamental parameters for Oluwaseyi's business, because you want to, I imagine that an ideal company for you guys would be a company that has a higher number of employees than not, because if you're selling payroll software, right, depending on how it's built and how it's priced, I imagine that the more employees that the company has, the more profitable they are for you to serve, right? So employee size would be one key parameter that you need to define, right? So you can break it down into, depending on how you choose to categorize it, it could be 0 to 50, 51 to 100, 100 to 300, or whatever. And then you determine, like, based on your internal, or based on your pricing and how your product is priced, you can determine what range of employee size makes the most sense for your business. And then when you populate the data or the documents, you can then pull that out or rank those companies as the ones that are higher ranked. So in summary, by building out these parameters, and then you have to actually think through what is relevant for your business, right? And that's why I said narrow down to on the employee headcount parameter as something that's relevant for his business. Because if you just use generic parameters that don't really tell you anything unique about your business, then it misses the point. But if you pick both the generic parameters that you may have to pick because they are relevant to the ICP, and the specific parameters that give you more insight into your business, then you're in that sweet spot where you can actually determine that, okay, based on these parameters that I've selected and what the data tells me, this company is an ideal prospect for me. So that's essentially what needs to be done. And like I said, that first step is in building out the templates and populating like the parameters that you want to measure. After building out the template and populating the parameters, the next step is now filling out the data within each parameter, right? And that's where you can lean on publicly available data that you can find online, right? So if you have industries that you've defined, right? Financial services, travel and hospitality, construction and real estate, etc. You can, and these are some of these to a large extent are regulated industries. You can then go to the regulator, like the websites of the regulators, to pull the list of companies that that are actually licensed, that are listed there, and then insert those companies into the relevant parameter, and then determine based on those companies. So, like for example, if we say large businesses here, and we're looking at financial services, we can easily just go to the Central Bank of Nigeria's website, right? We're just using Central Bank of Nigeria. If it was any country, like you could go to the Federal Reserve in the US, you could go to the South Africa Reserve Bank in South Africa, or Bank of Ghana, or wherever, or the Bank of England, right? And you can easily go to their websites and pick out the list of licensed companies and then include them in your list of financial services companies. Profile them by their segment, right? So if it's and the thing about this business segmentation is why it's very important is because things like micro enterprises. So there's a generally acceptable definition for a micro enterprise. And I think it's something like companies that have 2 to 10 people or something like that. That's what is generally considered to be a micro enterprise. There's also a definition for a small business, a company that has maybe, 10 to 50 people or something like that, right? So based on those definitions, when you pull a list of companies from any source, any website, any regulator database or wherever, you can then actually profile them along each parameter based on the reality of who they are, right? So if you pick a bank, right, let's just say we picked a random bank in Nigeria, First Bank, based on, and then you can always get First Bank's data, annual reports, based on the number of employees that First Bank has, based on its revenue, based on its assets and all of that information, its geographical coverage or reach, you can actually now fill out the range of parameters. So you would come in and say, okay, First Bank is a multinational because there are multiple countries, right? So you can already tell that if they're operating in 5 or 6 countries, then they're multinational. So First Bank would be a multinational. It's a publicly listed company. So if you had publicly listed company as one of your parameters, or a for-profit company, you would check publicly listed and you check for-profit. Industry would be financial services. Now, country, you could have something like country of origin, and if the country of origin is Nigeria, which is where you're building from, then you check country of origin as Nigeria. Region is Africa, you check that. Employee size, you probably 10,000 plus employees, then you check that as large enterprise again, or sorry, as a sizable, like high, whatever whatever way you want to classify employee size. If they have 10,000 plus employees, then you want to probably classify that as like very large organization from an employee standpoint, as opposed to a micro organization from if they had only like less than 10 employees. So when you check all the data points in, you now paint a picture of each company that you've profiled in the ICP report. Now, after you've been able to populate the ICP report with all of that data, you now want to rank the companies based on the most relevant data, right? So you might even just pick out like 3 or 4 parameters to use to do your ranking. And that's why I said the parameters you pick have to be relevant to be able to give you the insights that you want. So if you pick 3 parameters and you say, okay, the business segmentation, the employee head count, the years active, and the estimated revenue. So that's 4. If you pick those 4 parameters as the most relevant to determining your ICP, you then now want to filter by those parameters. So if you start, after you've populated it, when you sort from the largest to the smallest across each parameter, you then are able to surface the companies that rank highest across each of those parameters. And once you're done with this, you can even choose to filter by all the parameters that you have. But typically, when you filter by the top 3 or top 4 parameters, a picture quickly starts to emerge as to who your ideal customers are. And at that point, you can then come here and start to look at what the data says, and it will tell you quickly, maybe the top 5 or top 10 would not necessarily be multinationals. Maybe there will be large enterprises, or you see 4 large enterprises, 2 corporates, 2 multinationals, and 1 SME. And then, in company type, you might see mostly for-profit. Industry, you might see financial services, you might see professional services, you might see hospitality, you might see retail or for consumer goods, etc., etc. By the time you're done ranking, right, you would then, that picture of who, you look at, again, depending on how large your list is, you might have 50 companies here, you might have 100 companies here. The top 20% or top 25% will start to give you quickly an idea of who your ideal customers are. So you can then take that data and start to document the insights that you've seen across each parameter. So you take the business segment and say, okay, out of the top 20, these, 30% or 50% or 60% of the top 20 fall under the large business or corporate segment. And then you go to the next parameter and see again, like 60% fall under this category. By the time you're done extracting those insights and distilling them, you then have a very clear picture of who your ideal customer is across those relevant parameters. That now empowers you to say, okay, based on all of this information, in building my pipeline to actually now start executing and selling the products to potential customers, this is where I'm going to focus my activity. I'm going to be looking at to generate a list of customers that are large corporates or corporates in 1, 2, 3, 4 industries in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries who have XYZ or X number of revenue per annum, who have 5 to 10,000 customers, 5 to 10,000 employees, and this and that and that. That just now helps you to focus your pipeline generation efforts and then sell in a very targeted way to the prospects that you have the highest chance of making an impact with or on. So that's essentially the process of building the ICP or running the ICP analysis and narrowing down on who your ideal customer profile is. Yeah, so again, that has been quite a lengthy explanation. Let me pause again and allow you guys if you have any questions.
All right, thanks, Charles.
Yes.
This has been very insightful. So now is the time to ask questions if you have questions to ask. Oluwaseyi, does that help?
Yeah, I most sincerely appreciate Charles for this very detailed explanation. I mean, he's giving some of the things he made mention of are things I've done. I mean, working on numbers, headcount per company, and all of that are things I've actually worked on prior to this session. but with his extra touches, I've been able to have a much more clearer headway on how to like reach out to my ideal customers in the new year. So thank you once again, Charles.
You're welcome.
All right then. Thanks, Shay. I'm happy to hear that. So, any other question before I ask the questions that I want to ask? Bianca is new to tech sales, and Fadeke, I really hope I pronounced that correctly. So from what has been talked about so far, what we are trying to say is that an ICP is identifying your ideal customer profile. As a salesperson, as a saleswoman, as a salesman, it is important that you know who your ideal customers are. That way, you're not just spraying and praying that it sticks. You're identifying those people that really, really need the solution that you're selling. All right, and you're going straight to them. You're not just knocking on all the doors and hoping that your customer is behind one of them. So that is what we are trying to say, and this is very important for every salesperson to understand. All right, so I hope that gives you more context. So if you have questions, please ask questions. This is the time to do so. While we're waiting for questions to come in, my question for Charles is this. For example, the employee headcount now, how is that? How does that really influence the sales process? Because sometimes you might see that a company might not even have like a lot of employees, but they have the money to spend. Like, why do we just basically, how does that influence it? If you get what I'm trying to say.
Totally get what you're trying to say. Yeah. So again, it depends on how the product will be priced, right? And let me give you a typical example. Imagine this payroll product, right, that Oluwaseyi's company has built. The commercial model might be such that they charge per employee that is profiled onto the system and that is paid, right? So he's giving thumbs up. So maybe I'm spot on. And typically, like, even if you look at it from a payment standpoint, right? When companies are running payroll, the products or the systems that they use typically charge, like the payment systems they use typically charge based on the number of employees that are being paid. So if you have 200 employees, you're going to make 200 API calls or do 200 transfers. And so a payments company will charge you per transfer that you make. So if you have 1,000 employees, that the company will charge, or the product will charge you for 1,000 transfers or 1,000 transactions that you're going to do. Whereas if you had only 50, they will charge you for 50 and 10 and 5 or whatever the number is, right? So that's why you have to think about the commercial model, right? How does your business charge for the product or service? So again, SaaS products will typically charge per user, right? If you think of CRMs like Zoho or Pipedrive or Salesforce, right? Most of them will charge now per user. There might be an entry level or base license fee that you pay, but for every user that you add on top of that, you get to charge maybe $1 or $5 per additional user. So if you were selling a CRM, right, and you were trying to narrow down on your ideal customer profile, a parameter that will also be relevant will be how many salespeople does the organization have, right? If you're selling, you want to sell to companies that have, like, especially if you're selling something like Salesforce, you want to sell it to companies that have, large sales teams of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people versus smaller sales teams. Because for a smaller sales team that has like 50 or 10 people, something like Salesforce wouldn't work for them based on how Salesforce prices or charges for the CRM. So in defining the parameter, you always have to think of the commercial model and how the business makes money so that you can determine whether a certain parameter is relevant to that process of analyzing the ICP, like the ideal customer profile. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. That does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Any other question? People in the room? Okay.
No, I'm just listening and soaking everything up. I'm just
Okay.
listening and soaking everything up.
Fantastic.
That's good to hear.
Right. So in a nutshell, just to summarize what I've said, I think the process of determining your ideal customer profile involves defining parameters or attributes, right, that you would use to classify who an ideal customer is. And in defining those attributes or characteristics, right, you want to think deeply about your business and what is relevant, like what quality would really make you say this is an ideal customer based on the product or service that you're selling, right? If you were running a laundry, you would want to be targeting, busy professionals who don't have the time to do, their laundry themselves, who, because of their schedules, they're busy like 6 out of 7 days a week, and therefore they don't have time to do laundry themselves, so they'd rather drop it off and pay for it to be done, right? That is so. In defining that the ICP for a laundry, one of the attributes you would want to define would be, the professional, like the type of professional. Are they working professionals? Are they sort of freelancers? Are they digital nomads? And like whatever type of professional that will be relevant to determining whether a certain customer will be an ideal customer. Because if the person is a freelancer or someone who works from home, they might not necessarily be the ideal customer for a laundry. But if it's a busy professional who works on site, full time, no hybrid work from home, doesn't typically have free time at any point in or most times in the day or in the week, then that person would fall into the category of the busy professional that will be an ideal customer for a laundry service. I see Bianca has a hand up.
Yes, I did have a question come to mind. So once we identify the ICP, then we would kind of go into a similar process where we make another sheet for the buyer persona, and then we start breaking it down from there.
Sorry, there's a bit of background noise. I lost the question, but I heard the build-up. Can you just repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry. So I was just asking, so once we identify the ICP, then we would make a similar sheet to now go into those companies and find the buyer persona.
Exactly, right. So once you've done the ICP and you've sort of profiled the ideal customers and you've been able to rank or extract from the data those that are ranked higher and that would fit your ideal customer profile, you now want to move to the next step of generating pipeline, which is where you now take each company, identify the problem that you can solve for that company, and who within that organization you can have a conversation with about solving that problem. And that's where you start to identify the personas that you can potentially reach out to. So that's spot on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I guess as with everything, you would have to. This is something that needs to be practiced, that needs to be done. So I would encourage you guys to sort of put it to test. Build out a spreadsheet for your business today, and try to populate the sheet with the relevant parameters and try to fill out the data for those parameters and then see what you come up with. And yeah, it's something that I guess we can, at a later stage, we can maybe take, Gertrude or Akachi, we can take 2 or 3 and review it. Some folks who have built it and sort of help sort of just fine tune it and ensure that the folks are getting got this right and then are able to make some sense or use the whole framework essentially to build the ICPs.
Okay. So my question,
Yeah.
that'll be awesome, really. My question now is, will you share this ICP template?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share it.
All right, thank you. Bianca, your hand is up.
Yes, I did have another question. Charles, would you mind sharing, like, personally, what are your favorite channels of outreach? Is it cold call, emails, maybe social connections? What's personally like your favorite, and what have you found has worked the best for you?
Yeah, good question. So to be honest, I think warm outreaches I found them to be the most beneficial in recent times. So where you have people, and that's where it's very important to build a network within an industry. If you're just coming into an industry and you're just starting out your career, you have to be patient with yourself, but make the effort to build relationships. And that's where, attending events, whether offline or online events, connecting with people on LinkedIn, sort of following people on LinkedIn or social media, wherever you can, right? But more importantly, like just getting the information about the industry, learning, immersing yourself in the industry, learning about who is who within the industry, latching or like piggybacking on relationships, people that have relationships. So you might find people who are already established in that industry and build relationships with them so that you can leverage their networks to get access to the people that you need to. So for me, warm outreaches I've found to be very useful. Events are great opportunities to network as well. Challenge I think some people find is that people are happy to speak and connect at events, but then sometimes following up after events is a bit difficult unless you actually had a very meaningful conversation and were able to sort of pique someone's interest. But then, as I say, warm intros are I've found to be the most impactful, because if you're introduced to someone by a mutual contact who has a strong or good relationship with them, then chances are they would listen to you or hear you out with what you have to say and give you a response. Whereas if it's a cold outreach, unless you've done your research very well and unless you have some key information that you've been able to gather from internal sources from very, very solid discovery, then cold outreaches, at best can give you like a 20-25% success rate. But with warm outreaches, chances are, 80-90% of the time you're getting a response and getting to qualify whether that's an opportunity for you or not.
Thank you so much for that, Charles. Bianca, I hope that helps.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Just to add, while you explore social selling like Charles has preferred, it's also important that you try to explore, prospecting actively and making sure that your pipeline is full, be it through social selling, be it through cold calling and other means of communication. Yes, reaching out to people, it's attending events and connecting with people in real time. It's amazing, and it has done amazing for me as well. But it's also good that you explore other avenues as well. I just love to add that.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for Charles. One last question. We're way behind. How does a strong ICP contribute? And I'm asking this question for some persons in the room as well, just to give them more clarity and solidify our conversation. How does a strong ICP contribute to higher closing rates
Yeah.
And what metrics should teams track to measure this?
Okay, great question again. So remember that first point that I shared in the tweets from the tech sales guy. He said it doesn't matter how beautiful how beautiful your pitch is if you're knocking on the wrong doors, right? Think about the fact that the whole process of selling, is likened to like a funnel, right? So you start at the top, you put in at the top, you have your broad pipeline, right? All your prospects that you've identified, and then your sales process takes them sort of through a filter, and at the bottom, you get out the deals that you close, which have gone through the process of discovery, qualification, etc., etc. Right? So leveraging the ICP process, right, or identifying your ideal customer profile helps you qualify early at the top of the funnel, right? Because if you've been able to analyze and determine who your ideal customer is, that means the pipeline that you're starting with already, you filtered out the prospects that do not have as high a chance of closing as those that fall within your ICP, right? So if you were going to target 1,000 companies in a calendar year or a financial year, right? If you're able to run the ICP process, right, do the analysis and determine that out of those 1,000 companies that you identified, 600 or 500 fall within your ICP, then you're best rewarded for starting with those 600 than starting with any other random prospects in that list of 1,000, right? Because the fact that you've identified these as ideal customers based on certain parameters that you have already identified and that are relevant to your business, then it means that you have a higher chance of getting those people to listen to you and probably buy your product than what you have with the others who do not fall within your ICP. So that just sets you on the path of potentially closing better and having a higher success rate with the prospects that you actually do engage within whatever period it is that you're selling. And yeah, if you were to compare a process where someone sells after having gone through the ICP process to that where someone sells without going through that process, the data will show clearly, because running the ICP process is the first step of qualifying, actually. And that's what, qualifying is probably the most fundamental activity in sales, right? Because if you do not qualify properly a prospect, then you don't know whether they are likely to buy from you or not. And that is time that you waste, because qualification helps you determine very quickly whether this could be a yes or it's a no, right? And so the ICP process is the first step of qualifying, and it's the early step of qualifying that helps you filter out those that do not have a high likelihood of buying your product or service. And so by doing that, you set yourself on the path of selling in a more targeted way and achieving a higher success rate from your efforts.
All right. Interesting. Thank you. So what I want to do is I need to practice more on this. I feel like I work with RiseVest. It's a fintech company. So we sell financial services. But most times I'm curious to see how I can, how I'll be able to sell other products that are not what I've been selling for the past 3 years. So yes, this is I envisage myself taking the template that you share and just practicing with different companies that come to mind and just see how I can crack something. Yeah, that way I can solidify my expertise in being able to do this, because this is very important. Very important. I can't overemphasize. So yeah, if we have no other question, I guess we can call it an evening, right?
Yep.
So, Charles, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Anytime. I'll share
know-
the template with you, and then you can
Yes,
share.
please. And then I'll share with the community. Makes sense. Charles is also a member of the community. So feel free to reach out if you want to. If you have any questions after now, kindly reach out to Charles as well. Would love to have you asking these questions and learning more intensely. All right then. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you,
everyone.
Charles.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to connect with you guys, and all the very best. Look forward to
Mhm.
engaging with you on the Slack channel as well. And yeah, we'll see you again sometime soon.
All right then. Bye everyone. Good
Cheers.
night. Have a lovely weekend.
You too. Yeah, bye.
Thank you too.
Yes.